Ida for not apologizing to a woman for embarrassing her by dancing with another woman? Here is the ridiculous situation. My best friend and his long-term girlfriend are getting married next weekend. They decided to do a joint bachelor/bachelorette party with the wedding party in our old college town last weekend. They invited everyone's SOS as well. The only people without SOS currently are one of the bridesmaids, Maggie, and me. Maggie and I have known each other for years, since college. She still lives near our college town. She has on numerous occasions expressed a desire to date me. Our friend group has tried to encourage me to give her a chance, but I am not interested in her like that at all. About a year ago, she got a boyfriend and I didn't hear from her. They broke up about a month ago. The events leading up to the joint bachelor/bachelorette weekend painted a picture of anticipation and nostalgia, but also subtle tension. As my best friend's wedding approached, our friend group buzzed with plans and excitement. The idea of combining the bachelor and bachelorette parties had initially seemed unconventional, yet it soon became clear it would allow for a unique celebration of shared memories. Our old college town, a place where friendships were forged and lives were intertwined, felt like the perfect setting. For me, however, the weekend felt slightly complicated before it even began. Maggie was always a constant in my peripheral life, a presence I couldn't avoid but never truly sought out. Our shared history ran deep, from late-night study sessions in the library to spontaneous hangouts at the campus cafe, but there was always an undertone of awkwardness. It wasn't that she wasn't a good person. In fact, Maggie had a heart full of kindness, an endearing laugh, and a way of making everyone around her feel at ease. Everyone but me. There was a tension between us, palpable but unspoken, born from her obvious affection for me and my steadfast disinterest in anything beyond friendship. The pressure from our friend group to give her a chance only made things worse. Every glance, every word of encouragement from them felt like a nudge towards something I could never see happening. Maggie had made her feelings known countless times over the years, subtle at first, but then more overt. Invitations to coffee turned into what felt like thinly veiled dates. Comments about how perfect we'd be together lingered in conversations. But no matter how much she tried, my heart remained unmoved. It wasn't her fault, and I tried to make that clear, but such things are rarely simple. Last year, when Maggie started dating someone else, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't that I wished her ill, I genuinely hoped she'd find happiness, but the distance her relationship created gave me the space to exist without the shadow of her expectations looming over me. For almost a year, I didn't hear from her aside from group events. It was peaceful, a reprieve from the subtle but ever-present pressure. But when I heard through the grapevine that she and her boyfriend had broken up a month ago, my first thought wasn't one of sympathy or curiosity about what had gone wrong. It was dread. I knew Maggie well enough to predict how things would unfold. She'd lean on the familiarity of our friend group, gravitate toward me at gatherings, and perhaps hope that this time things would be different. Her feelings would resurface, and I would find myself once again trying to navigate the delicate balance of keeping the peace while maintaining my boundaries. The upcoming weekend loomed large in my mind. Maggie would undoubtedly be there, and with both of us being the only single people in the wedding party, I could already sense how the dynamic might play out. Our friends would pair off with their SOS, leaving us alone together. The thought of that felt suffocating, like being trapped in a situation where everyone silently rooted for an outcome I didn't want. It wasn't just Maggie's feelings that complicated things. There was an underlying fear of becoming the villain in our shared story. Maggie was well liked in our group. She was the type of person people rooted for, the underdog who always seemed to have the odds stacked against her in romance. And then there was me, reserved, focused, and somewhat guarded when it came to matters of the heart. If there was a narrative being told, it would be easy to cast me as the stoic, oblivious guy too blind to see what was in front of him. I hated that idea. I hated the guilt it stirred, even though I knew deep down that I wasn't doing anything wrong. The week leading up to the trip, I noticed subtle changes in Maggie's demeanor during group chats and planning sessions. Her messages were more frequent, her tone more enthusiastic. She asked questions specifically directed at me, like whether I'd be staying at the same hotel as everyone else or driving up early. It wasn't enough to make a scene but just enough to remind me of the dynamic between us. The others noticed too, though they never said it outright. I could see it in the way they exchanged knowing smiles or nudged me jokingly whenever Maggie's name came up. It was as if the entire group were waiting for something to happen, for some resolution to the tension they had grown so used to. As I packed for the weekend, a part of me wished I could back out entirely. But this was my best friend's wedding, and I couldn't let personal discomfort keep me from celebrating such an important moment in his life. I told myself I'd keep things cordial with Maggie, keep my distance if necessary, and avoid any situations that might be misconstrued. Still, the unease lingered, like the calm before a storm. By the time I arrived in the old college town, nostalgia mixed with anxiety in a potent cocktail of emotions. The streets, lined with familiar landmarks, brought back memories of simpler times. Yet, they also reminded me of Maggie, of the years we spent navigating the maze of friendship and unreciprocated feelings. I saw her before she saw me, standing near the restaurant where we were all meeting for lunch. She looked the same as always, though there was a certain energy about her, a nervous excitement that made me uneasy. As I approached, she turned and smiled, her face lighting up in a way that made me feel both welcomed and trapped. This was just the beginning, and I could already tell it was going to be a long weekend. The weekend started with a sense of hopeful anticipation, a delicate blend of nostalgia for our college days and the celebratory buzz surrounding the wedding. Meeting for a late lunch, the group reunited, and the air was filled with laughter, light teasing, and the comfort of old friendships. Maggie was already there when I arrived, her face lighting up as she waved at me from across the table. I gave a polite nod, doing my best to stay casual, but I couldn't help noticing the way her gaze lingered, the faint spark of hope hidden behind her cheerful demeanor. I settled into the group dynamic, determined to keep the weekend smooth and unremarkable, but the delicate balance was already shifting. After lunch, we moved to a nearby bar for happy hour. The place, a familiar haunt from our college days, had the same lively charm it always did, its walls bearing the wear of countless nights filled with music, dancing, and youthful exuberance. As we gathered around the bar, splitting into smaller conversations, I felt a familiar restlessness. It wasn't long before a group of women entered, their laughter cutting through the ambient noise. They seemed about my age, and one of them, a striking brunette with an easy smile, caught my eye. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might be looking at me, but I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. When I excused myself to go to the bathroom, the unexpected happened. As I walked past the table where the women had settled, one of them leaned over, her voice confident and inviting. "Hey, come join us," she said. Surprised, I hesitated but eventually walked over. Introductions were quick and casual, and I found myself talking to the brunette Stacy. She had an easy way about her laughter contagious and her presence magnetic. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, we had exchanged numbers. Something about her felt refreshingly different, and though I didn't dwell on it, I couldn't help but feel a sense of intrigue. Later that night, the group decided to go to a club, a plan that felt both nostalgic and slightly out of place in the context of our more settled lives. The decision was unanimous, and we headed to one of the more popular spots in town. As we found a table and settled in, the couples quickly paired off and headed to the dance floor, leaving just Maggie and me at the table. The situation wasn't unexpected, but it wasn't ideal either. Maggie, seizing the opportunity, struck up a conversation, and we started catching up. It was a surface-level exchange, polite and friendly, but I could sense the undercurrent of something more. She was trying to bridge the distance that had grown between us, searching for a way to rekindle the connection we once had. As we talked, a group of women entered the club, and Maggie immediately recognized them. They were friends of hers and, as she explained, mutual friends of her and her ex. Introductions were made, and though the interaction was pleasant enough, I felt a growing tension. It was as though the presence of her ex's friends served as a reminder of the unresolved emotions lingering beneath Maggie's cheerful exterior. The mood at the table grew heavier, though Maggie did her best to mask it. At some point, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I felt a hand grab my arm. Startled, I turned around to see Stacy, her smile wide and her eyes sparkling under the dim club lights. "Dance with me," she said, her tone playful but insistent. Without overthinking it, I agreed, letting her pull me onto the dance floor. The music pulsed around us, and we fell into an easy rhythm, dancing through 4 or 5 songs without a care in the world. Stacy's energy was infectious, and for the first time that day, I felt a sense of liberation. For those moments, the weight of the weekend's complexities faded, replaced by the simplicity of the music and the movement. When we finally stepped off the dance floor, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Returning to the table, I noticed that Maggie was gone. Checking my phone, I saw a group message from her, "Had to go." It was vague, but the timing felt significant. I didn't dwell on it, assuming she had just grown tired or needed some space. But as the rest of the group returned to the table, their concerned expressions told me there was more to the story. Someone tried calling Maggie, and after a brief conversation, it became clear she was upset. Very upset. Apparently, Maggie had broken down after I left the table. Her ex's friends, noticing her mood, had asked how she was doing post-breakup. Her response, according to the recounting, was, "You saw OP. How do you think I'm doing?" The words carried a weight I hadn't anticipated, a raw vulnerability that left the group momentarily stunned. And then, as if on cue, they all saw me on the dance floor with Stacy. The juxtaposition of Maggie's visible heartache and my apparent carefree dancing with a stranger was too much for her. She left in tears, feeling humiliated and betrayed. When the group explained this to me, I felt a mix of emotions: confusion, guilt, and frustration. I hadn't done anything wrong, at least not intentionally, but the optics of the situation made it seem otherwise. Maggie's lingering feelings for me, her fragile state post-breakup, and the presence of Stacy had created a perfect storm of misunderstandings and hurt feelings. The weight of it all was palpable, but I struggled to see how I could have handled things differently. Should I have stayed at the table? Ignored Stacy's invitation to dance? The questions swirled in my mind, but no clear answers emerged. The rest of the night felt subdued. The group tried to carry on, but Maggie's absence was a glaring void. Conversations turned to hushed whispers, glances were exchanged, and the celebratory energy that had defined the evening slowly dissipated. I couldn't shake the feeling that, unintentionally, I had become the center of a drama I wanted no part of. Back at the hotel, I replayed the events of the night, trying to make sense of it all. Maggie's reaction was intense, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. Her feelings for me, compounded by her recent breakup, had created a fragile emotional state. But was it fair for her to project those feelings onto me? To hold me accountable for actions that were innocent at their core? These questions lingered as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, knowing that the weekend was far from over and that the fallout from the night's events would undoubtedly carry into the days to come. The aftermath of the night unraveled like a slow-moving storm, its effects rippling through the group with an intensity I hadn't anticipated. At first, I thought Maggie's departure was just a quiet exit, perhaps prompted by fatigue or discomfort. But as the concerned whispers among the group turned into a collective effort to reach her, the true weight of the situation became clear. One of the bridesmaids managed to get Maggie on the phone, but what followed was a tense and emotional conversation that left everyone visibly shaken. Maggie was crying, her words heavy with frustration and hurt. The snippets I overheard painted a picture of someone grappling with feelings she could no longer keep hidden. Maggie told the girls that she felt humiliated and disrespected. She explained how, after I left the table, Her ex's friends, likely trying to be supportive, asked her how she was coping with the breakup. The question itself, innocent in intent, had struck a nerve. Maggie, vulnerable and raw, had responded with a bitter edge. "You saw OP. How do you think I'm doing?" Those words carried the weight of months of unresolved emotions, and they exposed the delicate thread connecting her unspoken feelings for me and the pain of her recent breakup. And then, as if the universe sought to twist the knife further, they had all seen me on the dance floor with Stacy. From Maggie's perspective, it must have felt like a cruel confirmation of her worst fears. In her eyes, I had not only ignored her presence but had done so publicly, in front of people who knew her history and vulnerability. It wasn't just that I had danced with Stacy, it was the timing, the audience, and the unintentional narrative that it created. When the call ended, the mood among the group shifted. The bridesmaids exchanged worried glances, clearly torn between supporting Maggie and trying to preserve the harmony of the weekend. My best friend and his fiancé, already juggling the stress of the upcoming wedding, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of a situation they hadn't foreseen. It wasn't long before they pulled me aside, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and exasperation. "She's really upset," my best friend said, his voice measured but strained. "She feels like you embarrassed her." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "I didn't do anything to embarrass her," I replied, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I went to the bathroom, danced with someone who asked me, and came back. How is that my fault?" His fiancée sighed, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "It's not about what you did, it's about how she feels. Maggie's been going through a lot, and I think seeing you with Stacy just hit a nerve. She's always had feelings for you, you know that." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. They wanted me to apologize. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because it was the simplest way to restore peace and salvage the weekend. But the idea of apologizing for something I had no control over felt wrong on every level. I had spent years walking on eggshells around Maggie's feelings, carefully avoiding situations that might give her false hope or cause unnecessary tension. And now, despite my best efforts, I was being asked to shoulder the blame for a situation I hadn't created. "I'm sorry she's upset," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "But I can't apologize for living my life. I didn't intend to hurt her, and I'm not responsible for how she interprets my actions." My best friend frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my response, but he didn't press the issue. His fiancée, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to say more, but the weight of the situation seemed to exhaust her. They both nodded and walked away, leaving me to grapple with the uneasy tension that now permeated the group. The rest of the night passed in a haze. The energy that had once fueled our reunion was now replaced with an awkward quiet, the group visibly fractured by Maggie's absence. I found myself replaying the events of the evening, questioning whether I could have handled things differently. But no matter how I turned the situation over in my mind, I couldn't see a version of events where I had acted maliciously or irresponsibly. The truth was simple: Maggie's feelings were her own, and while I sympathized with her struggles, I couldn't let them dictate my actions. The next morning, the fallout became even more apparent. Maggie refused to attend the group brunch, citing my presence as the reason. The others tried to convince her to join, but her stance was firm: she wouldn't come unless I apologized. The bride and groom, already on edge from the mounting wedding stress, now found themselves playing mediator in a conflict that had no easy resolution. In the absence of Maggie, the conversation at brunch revolved around the situation, despite my best efforts to steer it elsewhere. The bridesmaids, particularly the ones who had spoken to Maggie, seemed to view me with thinly veiled disapproval. To them, my refusal to apologize came across as stubborn and insensitive, a refusal to extend an olive branch to someone who was clearly hurting. But to me, the idea of apologizing felt like a betrayal of my own boundaries. I couldn't control how Maggie felt, and I couldn't pretend to be responsible for emotions that stemmed from years of unrequited affection. Later that day, I received a text from Maggie. It was short and pointed, a clear attempt to guilt me into submission. You really hurt me last night. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message, a mix of frustration and sadness washing over me. I wanted to respond, to explain my side of things, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Maggie didn't want an explanation, she wanted an apology. And while I felt for her, I couldn't give her what she wanted, not like this. The tension continued to build as the weekend progressed. Maggie remained absent from all group activities, her silence a constant reminder of the unresolved conflict. The others, caught in the middle, alternated between trying to convince me to apologize and trying to coax Maggie out of her self-imposed exile. Stacy, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. We exchanged a few texts, and her light-hearted messages served as a welcome distraction from the heavy atmosphere surrounding the group. By the time the weekend came to an end, the divide was undeniable. Maggie's absence cast a shadow over the celebrations, and the strain it placed on the bride and groom was evident. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of disappointment. The weekend, meant to be a joyful reunion and a celebration of love, had instead become a battleground for unresolved feelings and misplaced blame. Driving home, I reflected on the events of the past few days. Maggie's pain was real, and I didn't dismiss it lightly. But her reaction and the group's subsequent expectations of me had highlighted a deeper issue. For years, I had tiptoed around Maggie's feelings, afraid of upsetting the delicate balance of our friendship. But in doing so, I had allowed her unspoken expectations to dictate my actions. This weekend had been a turning point, a reminder that I couldn't keep carrying the weight of her emotions. As the road stretched out before me, I resolved to let go of the guilt that had followed me throughout the weekend. Maggie's journey was her own, and while I hoped she would find healing and happiness, I couldn't allow myself to be the crutch she leaned on. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity, a bittersweet realization that sometimes, protecting your own peace means walking away from the expectations of others. The weekend I had anticipated with nostalgia and excitement had turned into a whirlwind of unnecessary drama, and by the time Maggie's demand for an apology reached me, I had grown emotionally drained. Her ultimatum, an apology or her refusal to participate in any further group activities, felt less like a plea for reconciliation and more like a weaponized attempt to control the narrative. I couldn't bring myself to bend to her demands, not out of pride, but because I knew that caving would only perpetuate a dynamic that had been silently brewing for years. Her refusal to attend any other events effectively drew a line in the sand, one that divided not just her and me, but the entire group. The bridesmaids, feeling caught between loyalty to their friend and the necessity of supporting the bride, began to echo Maggie's frustrations in subtle ways. Their conversations with me became stilted, their glances tinged with judgment. Meanwhile, my best friend and his fiancé, already drowning in pre-wedding stress, became reluctant mediators in a conflict they hadn't asked for. Both privately asked me to apologize to Maggie, not because they thought I was at fault, but because they desperately wanted to restore peace. I could hear the strain in their voices, could see the toll this conflict was taking on them. But I stood firm. I had done nothing wrong. Apologizing, in this case, felt like endorsing Maggie's narrative, one that painted me as a callous villain indifferent to her pain. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't true. Yes, I empathized with her struggles and heartbreak, but I couldn't control her emotions, nor could I rewrite my own actions to fit her expectations. And so, when faced with the choice of acquiescing or maintaining my own boundaries, I chose the latter, even if it meant stepping away from the group entirely. While Maggie withdrew into her own bubble of self-imposed isolation, I found myself gravitating toward Stacy. The chaos of the weekend inadvertently gave us more time together, and what started as a chance encounter in a bar grew into something more meaningful. Stacy's presence was refreshing, her laughter and easygoing nature offering a reprieve from the tension surrounding the wedding party. We spent much of the remaining weekend together, exploring the old college town, sharing stories, and discovering a natural chemistry that felt unforced and genuine. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a grand declaration of love, just two people enjoying each other's company, untainted by the drama unfolding in the background. But while my time with Stacy provided a welcome escape, the ripple effects of the conflict with Maggie couldn't be ignored. Her absence at events became a glaring issue, one that cast a shadow over the pre-wedding celebrations. The group was divided, each person trying to navigate their own feelings about the situation. Some felt pity for Maggie, others frustration. But the bride and groom bore the brunt of it all, their joy muted by the tension that had infiltrated their carefully planned weekend. On the final day before we all parted ways, my best friend pulled me aside for a private conversation. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and disappointment, and I knew what was coming before he even spoke. "Look," he said, his tone measured but firm. "I get why you feel the way you do. And I know Maggie's reaction isn't entirely fair. But this is my wedding week. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and instead, I feel like I'm managing a crisis." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not saying you have to apologize. I'm not even saying you're wrong. But I need you to understand that this whole situation is hurting everyone, not just Maggie. It's hurting me, it's hurting her, and it's hurting the group. And I needed to stop." His words hit me harder than I expected. I could see the toll this weekend had taken on him, and for the first time, I began to question whether standing my ground was truly the right choice. Was my refusal to apologize about principle, or was it about pride? And more importantly, was holding on to that principle worth the collateral damage it was causing? That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, replaying the events of the weekend in my mind. I thought about Maggie, about the years of unspoken tension between us and the unintentional role I had played in her heartbreak. I thought about Stacy, about how her presence had brought a lightness to my weekend even as everything else seemed to crumble. And I thought about my best friend, about the quiet plea in his voice when he asked me to consider the bigger picture. In the end, I made a decision not because I felt obligated, but because I valued the people involved more than I valued being right. The next morning, I sent Maggie a text. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense, but it was an acknowledgement of her pain and an attempt to mend the divide. "Hey Maggie, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if anything I did this weekend hurt you. That was never my intention. I hope you know I care about you as a friend and only want the best for you." Her response came a few hours later, and while it wasn't exactly warm, it was civil. "Thank you for saying that. I'm sorry for overreacting. I think I just needed some time to process everything." It wasn't a resolution, not really, but it was enough to take the edge off the tension. Maggie attended the wedding, though she kept her distance from me. The day itself was beautiful, a celebration of love and commitment that reminded me of what really mattered. Watching my best friend and his fiancée exchange vows, I felt a sense of peace. The drama of the weekend, though frustrating, paled in comparison to the joy of seeing two people I cared about start their lives together. As for Stacy, our connection didn't end with the weekend. We kept in touch, our conversations growing deeper as the weeks went by. What had started as a chance meeting turned into something real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the possibilities ahead. Looking back, the weekend wasn't what I had hoped for, but it taught me an important lesson about boundaries, empathy, and the complexities of human relationships. I realized that sometimes, doing the right thing isn't about being right, it's about choosing kindness, even when it's hard. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.